Hi, everyone. I'm Lexi Iverson, and I am with my group mates, Franny Palmer and Marie Seavey, and we are proposing our policy to improve transition planning in order to ultimately disrupt the SPED to prison pipeline.
And so we want to spend some time just discussing who are the stakeholders and who are we seeking to address and where is the impact happening. And so Franny's going to introduce where the stakeholders are at the micro level.
Yeah, thank you. So at the micro level, we are looking at families, youth and adults with disabilities, and special educators. So our policy is aiming to improve the livelihood of youth with disabilities, particularly youth in high school and youth transitioning out of high school. And so we're hoping to improve their lives as well as their parents and siblings having the peace of mind that they're getting the services that they deserve. And our plan also helps special educators, giving them more support in making the transition plan to ensure that their students can succeed.
Great, thank you. And so then looking at the meta level, going out just a little bit, there are many people in the community that we can sort of tap and get their expertise to help these young people transition successfully into the community without any interaction with the juvenile justice system. So this includes the Department of Rehabilitation, their vocational instructors. It also includes staff at juvenile justice facilities and ensuring that they are getting accommodations and services, but also district school board members who may be allocating funds, potential employers of these young people, and those who are advocating for disability rights.
At the macro level, we're looking specifically at IDEA, which it might be time for it to be refreshed. Also, the federal and state departments of education, as well as members of Congress. If we're looking to scale up and have our proposals and recommendations happen at a larger level, these are the levers we need to push upon. So before we explain our recommendations, we want to first spend some time highlighting two trends we seek to address. We're talking about deconstructing the SPED to prison pipeline, which a lot of us know as a school to prison pipeline. But if we look more deeply at the data and the population of who's incarcerated, we see that there's a disproportionate impact of incarceration on youth with disabilities. Although 13% of the overall student population has a disability, 1 in 3 youth in juvenile justice systems qualify for special education services, and some estimates are as high as 85%. So whether or not the data falls on the lower or higher end of that spectrum, the fact still remains that youth with disabilities are 3 to 6 times more likely to be incarcerated than their non-disabled peers. And then what's important to note is that when they are detained, that 50% of those young adults aren't receiving SPED services that include academic supports, counseling therapies, occupational therapy, speech and language supports, and other services related to their disabilities. We just want to it's important for us to note that the intersection of disability and youth incarceration is not correlation, is not causation, but rather correlation. Having a disability doesn't mean that you are automatically inclined to engaging in criminal-like behavior, but perhaps we live in a society that penalizes youth with disabilities for their behaviors. And we also want to note other data that we're seeing. In addition to increased likelihood for incarceration, individuals with disabilities are struggling to have gainful employment. Overall, they're 2.5 times less likely to be employed in the labor force and 3 times less likely to be employed compared to their peers without disabilities. But if we pare it down by age and look specifically at youth, we see that this trend of unemployment starts as early as young adulthood. Not only are youth with disabilities more likely to be incarcerated, they're also less likely to be employed starting at the age of transition, which is at 16, up until early adulthood when compared to their same age peers without disabilities.
We wanted to talk a little bit about the background of transition planning. And transition planning is supposed to identify skills that students in special education and on IEPs can develop for after for after they graduate high school. And this can include employment or higher education, but we're going to focus on employment as we've been talking about. Transition planning has to begin by the time a student turns 16, and most schools wait pretty soon before they turn 16. And transition teams are responsible for identifying goals and any accommodations needed to meet that goal. And transition activities and goals should be listed out on the student's IEP, so there's a little more accountability that it's listed somewhere and should be worked on. Some issues are that skills are identified by teachers and they're not identified by community stakeholders. So community stakeholders could, help special educators who might not have requisite skills for career-specific goals. For instance, not every teacher is going to know what skills you need to be, say, a mechanic. And transition planning starting at age of 16 might not be adequate because it doesn't give a lot of time for students to develop skills and develop relationships with community stakeholders.
Yeah, so as we've talked about, these connections and this transition into the community is really important, particularly for our students with disabilities. So the urgency is there, as we've demonstrated. What currently happens, unfortunately, is that many of these transition plans, although they are part of the IEP, fail to deliver the transition services that will ultimately address those students' needs in the community. And the implementation of a transition plan, including those real life experiences and connections that would be absolutely critical to that student being successful in the community, are not happening. So we believe that effective transition plans and community connections could lead to higher wages for students. It will allow them to have information about different careers. So we're giving them many different options prior to them having to make a decision in the community, which will lead them to really be able to make an informed decision of what comes next for them after they've done the research, they've had those experiences. And ultimately, once they know sort of where they want to head, they can develop the advocacy skills that will help them identify their own needs in that work environment and how to ensure that those needs are met.
So the three parts of our transition plan policy is to lower the age of transition planning to 8th grade to ensure smooth transition into high school and time to develop skills as outlined in transition plans. The second part is to create a position called Transition Plan Specialist to connect with community community resources and students. And we also would like to require collaboration with DVR to coordinate resources and attend IEP meetings. Our first recommendation is to lower the age of 8th grade, which will ensure a smooth transition into high school. It will give students and educators time to work together to compose an appropriate transition plan. And students will also get more time to build relationships with community stakeholders. Also, students will have time to explore careers that they might want to pursue. As we all know, it takes time to look at, what careers you might want to have part of your life, and really 1 or 2 years is not sufficient, and it's good to have the supports from the school as long as possible during that process. And it also gives more time for community stakeholders to understand the disability and overall to understand the value of people with disabilities. So allowing more time for community stakeholders to work with students who have disabilities will help them, might help community stakeholders realize that people with disabilities have worth in that sector, and possibly working to erase some ableism.
Thank you, Franny. The second recommendation our group proposes is hiring, as Franny mentioned earlier, creating a position known as a transition plan specialist. The current challenge facing our school system right now is that there are 455 high school students for every one counselor. And oftentimes that one counselor is supporting students with college admissions, applications, FAFSA, scholarships. We don't refer to them as transition services, but they really are for students. It's worth noting that only 13% of students with disabilities plan on attending college within the first 2 years of graduating from high school or finishing high school. And so the question remains is what happens for the other 87% of students with disabilities who don't plan on going to college? This is often like a marginalized or hidden inequity that exists. And so our proposal to mitigate that is creating the transition plan specialist position. This person at the school is working specifically with students with disabilities to connect those students with services. Depending on their grade level, those services are either happening directly at the school or off campus. So when students are 9th and 10th grade, that transition plan specialist is connecting students with services that are happening at school, whether those are independent living skills or assistive technology services, job training. Those kind of programs can exist at a school-based level. But as that student ages until 11th and 12th grade, is considering post-secondary exit from high school, that transition plan specialist is working with students to connect them with services that are happening off campus, out in the community. A lot of those services might look similar to what is happening at school, but it's important to just acknowledge that once those students transition out into the community, that they need to access those services as well, not just at school. And then our proposal is that we have 72 students for every one transition plan specialist. And
Great. And so coupling both of those policies, including reducing the age and hiring that transition plan specialist, we hope to also require collaboration with the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, who will then be coordinating resources in the community because they usually have access to all of those resources and are very familiar with working with students with very diverse needs. Currently, access to those services from DVR are very limited just due to staff shortages, financial resources not being robust enough, and many who will really benefit from these services do not qualify currently. So our proposal is to, with that transition plan specialist, have them collaborating every semester and at every IEP that includes a transition plan, so that that representative is bringing their contacts from the community and they are really informed about every student that will be entering that community from the 8th grade. So by the time they graduate high school, they will have a really firm grasp on who the student is and what their needs are and who in the community can help meet those needs. These stakeholders they can be bringing to the meetings could be really anyone in the community that would benefit from meeting this student and who the student could benefit with connecting with. So this could be future employers, this could be someone who's just in the field that the student may want to learn more about, and it could be those involved in the training programs that the student may be seeking post-graduation. And ultimately, these connections that are formed and the contacts that are formed with the family and the student will really help them get started in their process of transitioning. So once they leave high school, they still have a team around them that really comprehensively understands their needs and is invested in allowing them to be a really successful part of the community and access all of the things that will allow them to access. So that is our policy. Thank you so much for listening. And we hope to, thank you so much.
Hi.